last, before we get into the actual content of this video, I do want to address what I feel like is the elephant in the room, and that is my glasses. So, this is not my normal look. If you've watched any of my other videos, I did break my actual glasses, like my normal glasses, and unfortunately, I am so blind without my glasses, I can't see anything at all. So, these are the only other ones that I had. They are from 2015, my senior year of high school. So it's a look. It's what we've got going on. I don't think that this is going to stick around, but until I can get my other glasses either fixed or get new glasses, these are the only way that I cannot bump into things and read what I'm looking at on my guest star of a computer here today. So I'm sorry if it's distracting or there's like a lot of reflection in the bigger lenses. It's what I got. So with that out of the way, the actual concept for today's video. So I have seen a lot of people talk about this with Barbie, and then I've seen some Monster High discussion. I'm sure that people have talked about it with all kinds of dolls, but it seems like there's always a bit of a debate when it comes to fashion dolls and their proportions that they would have if they were, you know, real life people, and kind of body image and all of that. Like, there's a big discussion around that and how it affects young people who are growing up seeing these dolls and whether they look like normal, heavy quotations, enough for it to affect them positively. That's like a whole big discussion, and I'm kind of just hitting the tip of the iceberg today, but I thought it would be interesting to look at the reported national averages for female bodies. I am using the term female just because I'm looking at female presenting dolls today, and all of the measurements are based off of, you know, biologically female measurements, so that's why I'm using that term. I'm not trying to like alienate anybody or anything, so I'm sorry, but that's what we're doing today. Now, with that, wow, disclaimers abound. Like I said, I am looking at reported national averages. That is a very, very hard thing to find when people can come in so many wildly different shapes and sizes. If you are not the national average, that is more than okay. If you are below it, above it in some numbers, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Like I said, when there's so many different numbers to work with, when people can come in such a varied amount of sizes and shapes, the average can be a little bit skewed. It's not always accurate, but it is just the best way for me to be able to compare my doll's measurements to like an actual human measurement. So I did just want to say that I'm working with averages that I was able to find online. That doesn't mean that it's bad if your body doesn't look like this, or that this is the only kind of body out there by any means. I don't want anyone to feel like that. The other thing with that is that I am going to be discussing specific measurements of bust, waist, and hips, as well as height. I know that can be a sensitive topic for a lot of people, myself included. Like, this is, you know, on a personal level as well. And I just want you to know that I want to have a discussion with you guys. Like, I want to be able to talk about this with y'all in the comments. But if this is something that is going to make you feel badly about yourself, or is going to kind of make you slide into bad habits, please don't watch this video. As much as I want to be able to talk to you guys, it is much more important to me that you are watching out for your own health. And I know, like I said, that this is a very sensitive topic in terms of like body image and all of that. So if you think that this video could be damaging to your emotions or might make you feel negatively about yourself, please do just click off. And if you want to come back next week to see my next video, I'm more than happy to have you. I really don't want anyone to watch this if it might make you feel badly about yourself. That's literally the last thing in the world that I want. I want to have a discussion, but if you're not, you know, able to take part in that discussion, that doesn't make you weak. That doesn't mean anything bad about you. It just means you gotta take care of you. So if that's the case, thank you for clicking on this video. It has been lovely to have you thus far, but I'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day. Do something nice for yourself. To everyone who is comfortable staying though, hi. So as far as where I got the national average measurements, because like I said, that's what we're comparing to, that's kind of the baseline for this. Also, I will be putting all of these numbers up in like a spreadsheet at the end of the video so that you can see them if you're more visually inclined. But the national average height, as reported by the CDC, is 5 foot 3.5 inches. The national average waist size, also reported by the CDC, was 38.7 inches. The average bust size I found on healthline.com. It was a 34 double D. When you convert that into actual inches, it's a 39-inch bust measurement. And then the national hip measurement, as far as averages go, was surprisingly difficult to find. I think that there's a lot of information out there about like waist size because of like health articles, and we're not going to get into that discussion. But the hip size was much harder for me to find. So the only measurement that I could find in inches was from the New York Times from a couple years ago. More than a couple. It was like a decade ago that this came out. And they did specifically mention that this was the average waist measurement, or sorry, the average hip measurement for white women, which is problematic in and of itself. Like, white women are not all women, and obviously other women also have hips, and it's like, why? But that's the only number that I was able to find, so do keep in mind that that number is even more heavily skewed than the other numbers because it doesn't take into account any other race. I'm still baffled that that was the only number I could find, but I wasn't able to find a number in inches that included like women of all kinds, so that is unfortunately the only average that I have to work with. So that's my heavy disclaimer with that it's far from a perfect average. But that being said, I'm using the handy dandy body visualizer website to input these measurements into like a system and then kind of be able to have a picture to show you guys, because I feel like that might be easier for some people to kind of see a picture of what a person with those measurements might look like. This is not an absolute. You can have those measurements and absolutely look different, and that's fine, but this is just kind of an estimation based on their algorithm. So I'll pop that up here. This is what the national average, quote unquote, looks like according to Body Visualizer. So that's kind of the baseline that we are looking at to compare and contrast to these dolls. So, first doll that I'm going to be looking at is a Bratz doll. So with the Bratz doll, I don't own one currently, so I did have to get these measurements from the internet. I did not measure it myself, so, you know, take that as you will. But a Bratz doll scaled up from her 1/6 size to a human size would be 5 feet tall, have a bust size of 21 inches, a waist size of 13.5 inches, and then a hip size of 24 inches. So if we pop that information into the body visualizer, I was surprised by how hip heavy the Bratz dolls were. I don't know if it's just because of the scale of things, but when you look at a Bratz doll, I feel like they have more of a traditional hourglass shape, and there is still a little bit of that on here, but the hip measurement did surprise me. As you can see, it actually didn't let me go down far enough on the chest or the waist sizes. The lowest the website would let me go is actually 22 for the chest and 15 for the waist, so it is a little bit off from the actual Bratz measurements, but hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea. So that's what the Bratz doll looks like in the body visualizer. Then moving on to Rainbow High, I did take these measurements myself. I'm not great at math. I did do all of this twice just to make sure that I had, you know, the calculations correct. But just so you know, I measured myself. If you measure your Rainbow High doll and you get something else different, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best, like I said. But for a Rainbow High doll, they would have a height of 5'6", a bust measurement of 27.75, a waist measurement of 24 inches, and then a hip measurement of 32.25 inches. With the body visualizer, I do have to like round all this, so this is as close as I could get to what a Rainbow High doll would look like on the body visualizer. It is what I would say proportionately quite similar to the national average in terms of it being like a little bit more straight down. There's a slight curve at the waist, but it's not super, super intense like some of the other ones that you're going to see, or even like you saw with the Bratz doll, how the waist is wildly different from the hip measurement. So I did think that that was interesting, and I do think that this one, to me, looks quite a bit like the actual shape of the doll. Scaled down, I do think that the doll looks a little bit more hippie than the body visualizer version, but I think that it's fairly accurate to how I feel the shape of the doll is, whereas, like I said, with the Bratz, it didn't seem accurate. So that was just an interesting note. Moving on to Monster High, I also did take these measurements myself. Monster High would be pretty much right at the national average for height, with a height of 5'3", and then their bust size would be 18.75 inches, their waist size would be 15.75 inches, and their hip size would be 25.5 inches. Once again, I was a little bit surprised by how hippie they ended up being. Obviously, Monster High dolls are kind of infamous for their really huge thigh gap, so that, you know, also has to be taken into consideration, but very, very small, as you can see by the body visualizer version. Very small all around. Just all of the measurements are definitely smaller than the national average, but I would also say that this visualizer version looks quite accurate to a Monster High doll. I think their legs are probably significantly longer on the doll than it is in the body visualizer version, which is kind of funny to me. But, you know, I do think that this one looks kind of like shape-wise quite similar to a Monster High doll overall. Then next is going to be LOL OMG dolls. This one I also don't own, so again, I did get these measurements offline. So, you know, sources, fun. So an OMG doll would be 5 foot tall, have a bust size of 24 inches, a waist size of 21 inches, and then a hip size of 33 inches. With this one, I would say, again, looks fairly accurate. LOL dolls are known for being, you know, kind of wider in the hips. Again, I definitely think that the legs on dolls just across the board are usually longer, so that the proportions seem a little bit off from the body visualizer version, but that's what we've got going on here. Then I have got a Barbie doll. So, Barbie was a complicated one because, like I said, people have written articles about this before, and arguably I would say that Barbie has had the most talk about her in terms of what her proportions would be like as a real person. Helps that Barbie has definitely been around the longest, so there's that. But what I thought was really, really interesting is because there's so many articles written about this, there's numbers already online that you can find. So if you're going by the internet Barbie numbers, she would be 5'9" with a bust of 36 inches, a waist of 16 inches, and then a hip measurement of 33 inches. So that's what most articles are written with and reported on. But what was fascinating was that I own a Barbie from 2000. I was using that one because they make so many different shapes of Barbie dolls now with the fashionistas and like curvy and petite and tall and all of that, that I just thought it would be easier to use an old one. Also, that's the only one I have. So that's kind of what I was going off of, was like a standard quote-unquote Barbie. I did not get the same measurements, like not by a long shot. So the measurements that I got would put Barbie at 5'9", with a bust of 30 inches, a waist of 22.5 inches, and a hip measurement of 31.5 inches. The hips are pretty close, but the bust and the waist are 6 inches off each. So that's a pretty huge difference. So this is what the Barbie would look like from my measurements, which is definitely a less extreme silhouette. I would say doesn't look that close to an actual Barbie doll. We're going to discuss why in just a second. But it doesn't look what I would say a Barbie looks like, but that's what my measurements would put her at. This is what the internet's random measurements would put her at. So yeah, it looks very different. I wasn't really sure what to make of that. I'm not sure who originally came up with the internet's set of Barbie measurements, but I'm just going to be discussing mine because, like I said, I measure them personally, and while I don't have the most faith in my math skills, I know what I measured. So that's where we are with that. So we're just going to be looking at my version of Barbie. So with all of these, I do think it's really interesting to note that the body visualizer obviously takes into account actual human anatomy, which means that they have hip bones and rib cages. And the rib cages are really the biggest thing, is that actual people in real life have rib cages. Whereas if you look at a lot of these dolls, especially ones that have more of that hourglass figure like a Barbie doll does, she doesn't have room for all of the ribs that actual people have. And that's why her silhouette looks so different on the body visualizer website, is because it's taking into account the fact that, hey, you have to have ribs. Like, that's a critical function of being a person, but a doll doesn't have to have that. So I do think that that changes a lot of the shape of a doll, and that's the same with like LOL OMGs and Bratz as well. I think that that's why on the doll they look more busty, because their bust size is coming from like their breasts, and then their waist size can go in a little bit more dramatically than a person's can, because rib cages, but dolls don't have to have rib cages. And then you notice this most especially with internet Barbie's proportions on the body visualizer, but her hips make a huge difference, because in dolls, hips start what I would say pretty low, like they start more at the booty region, whereas, you know, for some people their hips show at the booty region, but everyone does have a hip bone that comes up like a little bit further than that. Some people might see this in their physique, some people might not. Either way is perfectly normal, but if you've ever heard of hip dips, that's what it is where your hip bone is like kind of right against your skin, and you can see it. So you have your hips that dip, and then you have like your hip measurement around the booty area that also dips in. So you get, I think they're also called violin hips, like a violin sort of shape. So with dolls, you never see hip dips, at least with the ones that I'm talking about today. Like you just see the more classic hourglass sort of shape going in from a waist to just the hips. But when you're working with measurements this small, it ends up looking a little bit odd. Like with my version of Barbie, an actual Barbie doll looks more curvy in the hip than this does, and that's because it's accounting for her hip bones, whereas Barbie dolls wouldn't have hip bones that are placed the same way as people, if that makes any sense at all. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I started out this video wanting to know which doll's measurements were the closest to an actual, like, possible proportion for a person, but it's really hard to deal with because dolls are stylized, and people are not. People are people, and they have bones and internal structures, whereas dolls are just made to look like the outside shape of a person, if that makes sense. So as far as this goes, I was interested in the fact that all of these measurements, when you put them in, look like a person. Like, they look humanoid. Obviously, they're doll measurements. That makes perfect sense. I shouldn't be surprised by that. But I think that when you think about the intense measurements and you scale them up to the size of a person, you would think that it wouldn't look humanoid anymore. Like, you can do some weird stuff with Body Visualizer to where it doesn't really look recognizable as a person. But all of these doll measurements put in, some look significantly skinnier, some have much bigger hips when brought up to, like, the person size. But they all still look like people. So, where I'm going with all of this is that a lot of articles condemn, like, Monster High and condemn Barbie for what their real life proportions would be like. And yes, they're not realistic. Like, I do totally understand that. But they're all humanoid. And when you take into account that people can look all kinds of different ways, it's hard to say what's appropriate for a doll and what's not, because it is kind of like drawing a cartoon. Cartoons don't always look, you know, proportionally accurate to what real people would look like, and I think that the same thing does apply to dolls. With that being said, I do think, and I talked about this a little bit in my video about the fact that Monster High is coming back, there could definitely be more representation. Most dolls are pretty slim, like you think about Monster High, and you've got people who are built very, very slim represented. If you think about a little bit of Rainbow High and then LOL OMG, kind of brats as well, you get people who have bigger hips kind of being represented. But like I talked about, there aren't any dolls that have hip dips. I do think that that would be kind of complicated to sculpt, but I'm sure you could figure out a way to do it. But there aren't any dolls that have hip dips, and there aren't any dolls that are curvier that are represented. And there's not really a doll that I would say, if you go back to the national average, that looks like the national average. So it comes down to, do I think that, like all these articles are writing, the proportions of dolls are harmful? And I can't say no, because everyone is sensitive to different things and everyone feels things differently. And I'm sure that there have been people out there, unfortunately, that see a doll and think that they don't look like that, and it hurts them. And my heart goes out to you if you feel that way, because I've been in a similar situation, but dolls never have really bothered me, and I think it comes back to kind of like the cartoon thing. I do think in general that, like, photoshopping models on magazines and diet culture and all of that is significantly more harmful, but I'm not going to say overall that the doll's proportions aren't harmful. That being said, I do think that it's not so much the inaccurate, quote-unquote, because again, people come in all shapes and sizes, but I don't think it's the inaccurate proportions that are so harmful when it comes to dolls. I think it's just the lack of representation of different body types, because I don't think that a Monster High doll would be so controversial if you could also find a doll that is shaped like the national average or is just like a bigger girl. That's where I think the real thing comes in. So I don't know, it's just kind of interesting for me to see that, realistically speaking, these are stylized humanoid figures. They all look human enough. The proportions aren't perfect, for sure. They're not the national average by any means, but it was just kind of interesting to do a little bit of a deep dive into this and look at it and think that, at least from my point of view, I feel like Barbie having a small waist and big breasts and big hips is not so much of a problem as it is the lack of other bodies. I hope that that makes sense. I do feel like I am kind of rambling a little bit, but that's kind of where I stand on it, is that dolls are dolls, they're like cartoons, they're stylized, but it would be cool to see stylized versions of other body types as well. So, in answer to my actual question that I put at the top of this video as the title, I don't think that any of these dolls is, you know, closest or furthest away to looking like an actual person, because people can look like a myriad of different shapes, but that's kind of where I sit. All of them and none of them all at once is the answer to the title question. So sorry if that's not very satisfying, but I don't feel comfortable really after looking into all of this and really like deep diving into it, quantifying what is supposed to look like a person, what isn't. So like, I don't know, that's where we are. I hope that this is an interesting discussion for you. It has taken up a weird amount of my time today, like much, much more than I thought it would, but I did think it was really fascinating to look into all of this and to see on the body visualizer what different doll body types would look like scaled up to an actual person. So kind of fascinating for me. I hope that you guys did enjoy. If you did, please do go ahead and like this video. Leave me a comment below talking about your feelings about this. I am super interested to see what you guys have to say as far as this discussion goes, but please do be respectful. Like I said, this is a sensitive topic. I don't want anyone to, you know, feel unwelcome or uncomfortable in the comment section. So please be nice. But with that said, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, your evening, whatever it might be, and I will see you guys next week in the next video. Bye, y'all.